Building pipeline is important, but you got to make sure you bring the right people into your pipeline. On today's episode, we're going to talk to you how you go about doing so and criteria that you can set up to make sure you're getting the right people who can actually help you hit your goals. You're going to love this one. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another great episode of the Sales Evangelist Podcast. I'm your host, Donald C. Kelly, the Sales Evangelist. And I'm so excited for another great episode. I'm so excited to be here with you today. And on this episode, we have an amazing guest. His name is Lawrence Wayne O'Connor. You can get a chance to connect with him. He's with the Practice Lab. And you probably have remembered that name because Jonathan was on our podcast, his business partner, recently. Now, the Practice Lab do a lot of cool things, and we have a link down in the show notes so you can learn about them. With any type of podcast, our goal here is to help you to build pipeline and help you to increase your close rate. And today's going to be no different. Lawrence is going to share with you this idea of what we need to do to make sure we're not just bringing people in. Yes, we want a 3 to 5x our pipeline, but can we make sure we're doing this more at an appropriate way? So we're not just adding deals for deal's sake. And obviously, there are certain things that we can take from this and apply right now. I promise you, you can take this back to your team and your whole organization can benefit from it. If this is your first time listening to our podcast, subscribe. Or if you're watching a video, go ahead and do so as well. And we'll make sure we notify you every time we have new content. As we dive in, you get a chance to learn a little bit more about Lawrence, the Practice Lab, his experience, and how this all ties in to helping us have a dope episode. You're going to love this one. Lawrence, welcome to the show, man.
Good to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm looking forward to this. Did get a chance to connect with Jonathan, and we're linking back to that episode for folks who are going to get a chance to learn more about Practice Lab and some of the cool things you all are doing. I really admire what's working and what you're all doing right now. So I think, obviously your experience brings a lot to our community. And would love to have you take a second. Tell us a little bit more about you and remind people about Practice Lab for a sec.
Yeah, for sure. So I was born and raised in Chicago, moved to Atlanta to go to Emory University. I was a basketball player, so always been an athlete and always loved music as well. Very musical family coming up. So my career started in sales when I worked at the Apple Store, in the front of the Apple Store, selling MacBooks, laptops, all that kind of stuff. And in the back of an Apple Store, there's a team called the business team, and we would actually sell full-scale Apple solutions with software to small businesses, SMBs, that kind of thing. But I was always the sales guy who was creating his own content. Then I worked at a couple startups, and I was the marketing guy who was always hanging with sales, doing ABM and that sort of thing. So I was always kind of bouncing between sales and marketing. And the only other passion I had within that sales space was teaching and sharing information. I love the information space and the knowledge space and being able to teach and develop skills in sellers. So once sales enablement kind of rose to prominence, that was the perfect mix of sales and marketing. My last full-time role was the director of sales enablement at a company called Verif, Series C startup, had the whole unicorn tag and we had 80 sellers globally, that whole thing. And I love it. I love coaching sellers. I love working with sellers. But it's really hard to make those behaviors stick. And so when I linked up with Jonathan, I had already been working on an idea for a program, a sales coaching program that was more focused on retention and how we could embed practice into what we were doing. Going back to that athlete background, practice is everything. So when I connected with Jonathan, we just really vibed and connected on a lot of the things we were talking about. He asked if I wanted to come on as co-founder. I accepted, and now I'm full-time at the Practice Lab. So our whole idea is around embedding practice into your sales culture the same way you would with a sports team or as a musician.
Love it. And it makes total sense, right? It just seems like, and again, we'll link back to that Jonathan episode so you guys can check that out. But you got to make sure you practice, and you got to make sure you run the motions. It's about being consistent. I did track and field, did flag football, and also played soccer. And any of those sports, we ran the same motions over and over and over again until we got a muscle memory, so to speak. And it's critical and important on that. Now, today, one of the things we're going to talk about, qualifying pipeline. And there's one of the things that we talk about a lot on this show is 3 to 5x in your sales pipeline. Now, you bring up something that's critical, and I'm a big believer in that, is the idea of qualifying the right people and qualifying the right pipe. And one reason we're seeing is that there's the economic uncertainty in certain industries are requiring people to make sure they have a bigger pipe. However, you don't want garbage in. What can we do to make sure we're taking the right people in? We want to make this is like a club. This is an exclusive club. Not everybody's coming in tonight. Who are those people coming in? And what are some ways that we can go about qualifying the right people to enter our pipeline?
Absolutely. I love the club analogy. One of my favorite films is Knocked Up. And there's that bouncer scene where he's at the front. He's like, I can't let you into this club because you're too old. I think we need to be pickier with how we let people into our pipeline, man. I think there's a
uh,
difference between qualification and discovery. Discovery is something that happens throughout the sales cycle, but qualification is really something that happens at the
amen.
beginning. And you have your med picks, you have your Challenger, Sandler, all these different methodologies to kind of help you identify BANT, if someone is worthy of kind of going through the sales process. But more than anything, I
Mhm.
think you want to make sure that you're not setting yourself up for failure. And one of the things that I've kind of noticed, and I don't see a lot of people talking about, is that there's almost an inverse, like an inverse of what your sales pipeline is to win rate. So let me explain that a little bit. If I'm required by my CRO to keep 5x my quota in my pipeline at all times, the average win rate of that team usually hovers somewhere around 20%. If I'm required to keep a 6x pipeline multiple, or quota multiple in my pipeline, the win rate is somewhere around 16%. So it's not an exact science, but that's something that I've just kind of noticed. And the reason being is you're playing a
Yeah.
numbers game. You're saying, well, we're only expecting to get 16% or 20% win rate. So we got to make sure we have 5x pipeline so we can report back to the board and we know what we're getting, or we know what we're going to close at the end of the quarter. But the best sellers that I work with, they've kept a 2x of their quota in pipeline or maybe 3x, and they have a 40% or 50% win rate. So what's the difference in that and what they're actually being told to do? What I'm seeing is that they're actually being much more rigid and much more ruthless in qualifying people to actually go through the sales process. They're able to weed out people who are looking at their product for education purposes versus people who may buy within the next year versus people who have an extremely painful problem that they should have solved 6 months ago. And that doesn't mean that all of them
Mm.
don't deserve to have a quality experience. It just means that you treat them differently and you treat their experience differently in terms of how you move them through your pipeline and how you report your pipeline back to the board. So I think we need to be much more ruthless with how we qualify pipeline, and BANT isn't always the answer. I think more than budget and authority and timeline, it's really how painful is that problem? Is this something that,
Mm.
is a nice to have, like a nice perfume, a Chanel number 5, or is it like a Vicodin where I don't need it often, but when I do need it, I really, really need it and would pay a lot for it. So you need to really be able to understand how painful that problem is and be able to quantify it and give it back to them.
How do you get to that level, though?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's about being able to ask questions and listen and carry a very natural discussion that doesn't sound like I'm checking off boxes on a checklist. I actually just want to have a conversation with you, see where you're at, hopefully give you some things of value that you can take along your way and give back to the rest of your team as you make a decision. Um, but I say this all the time to sellers that I work with is that your job as a seller is to help your buyer make the best decision they can in as little time as possible. So if you can
Mm.
look into or ask them questions specifically that are going to get them focused on what they're trying to accomplish rather than what your software does or what your tool does, then you can have a natural sounding conversation where you can make a human decision and decide, all right, is this someone that we can actually help or we want to actually move through our sales cycle? So I always say you don't want to go through a checklist and say, okay, budget, yeah. All right, authority, check. Need, yeah, they got a need within the next 6 to 12 months. You actually just want to have a conversation and see where they're at and maybe what they've done to try to solve the problem that they have. Or even if they identify that they have a problem or if they're just browsing at that point.
I think what you're going back on, which is something that I love, is the idea of being curious, curiosity, and as we mentioned, discovery is not just a one step part thing. It's a constant part of that process, right? Everyone you're constantly in that state of discovery throughout the whole process. But when you're curious, it goes way beyond like any of the different sales methodologies. You kind of go a little bit more. You can even ask, because none of them are going to tell you, well, tell me an example of that. Like, but I would love to hear an example of that or share an example. But it's just going deeper. You tell me like, yeah, we have um, we're looking for a CRM. Like, then if I'm a BANT person, I'd be like, great. Why are you looking for a CRM? I'd say because we need one to close more deals. Great, I got that. So now I got the pain. And it's like, no, there
Yeah,
seems like there's a lot more beyond that. One of the things that I love when it comes to going back to this picky idea is using this in a normal, natural way, right? But telling prospects something like, Jonathan, it sounds like there's a story deeper beyond that. And then obviously yeah, there may be. Tell me a little bit more about it. But now I'm because of the curiosity, I'm just going further, and it's not like some sales trickery. It's just curious. I just want to learn so I can best help if I can. You know what I mean?
absolutely. Absolutely. I think leading with curiosity is really, really important. One thing I also like to do is I like to try to get them to disqualify themselves. Meaning this is actually something that
Amen.
I learned at Apple. Because you always have there's like Apple fanboys who love everything that Apple puts out, and then there's always the people who come into the store who are just love Android or they don't care about Apple and they want to be sold. Tell me why I should get this Apple. I should get rid of my Android phone and get an iPhone. And my initial response would normally be, well, do you even need to get rid of your Android? Do you like your Android? What do you use it for? Maybe you don't need to get an iPhone. And at that point, either they say, huh, I really appreciate you being transparent with me. Actually, I don't. Or, no, I actually really want you to sell me on this phone. Well, what do you want me to sell you on? If it builds the desire within them to say, no, I actually do want to keep going. I do want to be a part of this process. So when you're talking about software, that might look like, okay, you need a new CRM. Well, why? What are you using right now? Are you using Google Sheets for your forecasting? How's that going for you? Why do you need to change anything? What would that cost for you to actually change? Maybe you don't. Let's figure out all the ways that we can move forward without doing anything about this and what that looks like. And then that helps them come to the natural conclusion of like, we can't afford to not do anything. So rather than say, hey, let me tell you why you need to act now, let me just help you figure out if there's any way where you can just not do anything and it's not even a problem. Because sometimes people believe that there's a problem in their business and it's not actually a problem. So if I can get them to disqualify themselves, great. But also, what happens more often than not is they're helping themselves realize like, no, I actually really do need to do something. And it builds the anticipation and the desire for them that's going to carry them through the next couple of stages. Because I'm going to be asking them to do some different things. I might ask them to sign an NDA. I might have them go through a proof of concept or testing, or they might need to involve their senior leaders. And if they're going to be going through and spending that social capital within their company to get something done, I need them to be committed to what the outcome that is that they're going forward towards. So often, rather than even trying to convince them of anything, I want to show them every opportunity of how they don't need to do something. And then if we still have the desire of like, no, we actually do, then I know that they're committed and I can qualify them.
Oh, money in the bank. I love it. I love it. Love it. Love it. The power of that disqualification. And I think it makes they will give you some really sound arguments after that, right?
Yeah.
Stuff that you couldn't even make up. You're like, dang, that's that's some good reasons why
Because you
you
know
need
what?
it.
They're the ones that have to sell it to the rest of their team. It's not me that's going to
Right?
be in the
Yeah.
room when they're having those conversations. So I want to make sure that they're actually tight. They have an airtight case when they go and speak to their senior leaders. And I can't influence that unless we actually use this time together to work on those stories and those narratives.
Is there anything else that you typically look at when it comes to back to the being, this bouncer and, so to speak, at the line before we let people in the club? We talk a little bit about the disqualification, talk a little bit about the, curiosity, talk about asking effective questions. What else can we do to make sure that we're letting the right folks in?
Yeah. Going back to that idea that I talked about a little bit earlier in terms of buckets, I want to put
Hmm.
people that I'm speaking to in the different buckets and help them understand what they actually want to get out of this process. Are they in education mode where they don't really have a painful problem just yet, but I want to be educated about what's happening because I see something coming down the road? Then I'm going to treat you a little bit differently. I'm going to focus on, well, how can not only you educate yourself, what are the best resources to do that? How can I help you build a case with the rest of your team? We're building awareness for the problem. There's not a clear problem defined. So we're in education mode. Others, they might be in, I see that there's a problem. It's not urgent yet. There's a couple other priorities that we got to knock out first, but I'm really interested in this. And personally, I'm very invested in this, but the rest of my team's not. So we'll probably look to move with this in the next
Mhm.
year or so, but it is important, just not right now. And then there's another group that's like, this is actually really terrible for us and it's been hurting us for a while now, and we can't sustain this any longer without doing something. So when you understand what bucket somebody belongs in, that doesn't mean you completely just disregard the educators or the people who are going to move in the next year and only focus on the ones who are having the most pain. It just means that you treat them differently. And so while I might report to my first line manager, my VP, and I say, hey, I'm not going to forecast this for the next year, or I'm not going to take on this deal right now, but I do want to work with them in the future. When I'm working with the customer, I want to provide as much value for wherever they are because I'm still building that relationship over time. It's just a matter of which pots do I need to stir and how fast. So I try to just put people into buckets and understand where they're at so that I'm not taking someone that's in education mode and trying to give them the urgency of someone that needed to solve something 6 months ago. I've got to do a little bit more of demand gen and problem identification with them before they have that level of urgency. So I'm just trying to measure people based on how painful that problem is and what is the awareness of the problem within the rest of the company.
Yeah. And I like that idea of the measuring of the problem and the go for again the idea of that the whole concept of the awareness. Like if the shoe doesn't fit or if it's a square peg, it just doesn't make sense to try to put it in that circle hole. And if they have those internal measurements or their they have their evaluation already that works, it just makes it so much more easier for me on my standpoint. I know in practice lab you guys do a lot of different type of practicing. If there's a sales rep that came to you, she's trying to improve her qualification skills, how would you go about doing that in practice lab to help this individual?
Yeah, that's a great question. So before you even get into really the improvement side of things, I think the step a lot of people miss is identifying that specific
Mhm.
skill and then identifying what good looks like. We call it WGLL. But if I don't know what good looks like, then I don't know how to actually self-correct or actually how to be coached in that direction. So let me tell you a quick story that might drive this home. So I played basketball in
Let's
college,
go.
and my freshman year we got a new coach, and that coach came from. I went to Division III college. It was called Emory University. It was in Atlanta. So Division III, for
Yeah.
anybody that knows college sports, it's a little bit smaller schools. Still NCAA, still big programs, but not as big as the ones you see in the big tournament at the end of the year. So we got a new coach, and that coach came from a Division I school. And so he brought with him all of the major practice sessions. He brought with him one of his assistant coaches. We ran all of their plays. We had all their values. We did everything that that major college did, and he implemented it with our team. So we had all of their playbooks and everything. We went from being 10th out of 10 in the conference to being 8th out of 10 that year in the conference. So we didn't really get that much better. It didn't move the needle too much. So before my sophomore year, he said, all right, we're going to go and we're going to play against my old school that I coached at. Um, and I want you to see them, play against them and see them run all of our sets back against us. So we go to this school. This school is called Davidson University or Davidson College. And at the time, they had a point guard by the name of Steph Curry. So I don't know if you know basketball. You might know a little something about Steph Curry. At the time, he looked like he was about 12, but he was 19. We're the same age. And so Davidson ran all of our sets, all of our play. We knew every play they were going to call, and they torched us by like 50 points. It was embarrassing. It was awful. Uh,
It's crazy.
an experience I'll never forget. Steph had about 30 on us. We went up to Davidson to play against them. It was awesome. But yeah, we were deflated to say the least after that. So at that point, we understood what a good team running our sets actually looked like, and we really were aware of the gap between where we were and where we needed to be. The good news is we had all the plays, we had the coaches, we had the people to actually correct us on that path. So that next season, going into practice, there was a different energy in our practice. There was communication. We spent way more time in the gym sharpening our skills because we were holding ourselves to the standard of a Division I school versus the other Division III schools. So I'll save you all the everything else, but basically we finished third in the conference out of 10 that year. And by the end of my 4 years, we were actually in the NCAA tournament for Division III, which was really big. So
That's
re-
dope.
The reason I tell that story is because you can have all the playbooks, you can have all the methodologies. These are made by people who are extremely smart sellers and people who are extremely have had tens of years of practice in sales. But what you're skipping is actually those reps, those game reps, and actually giving the opportunity to actually try these new things. So that really turned me on to the power of getting that practice. So things we could do to practice that. I'll give you another analogy is like Kobe Bryant actually took tap dancing lessons to work on his footwork. So during the off season, he would do tap dancing or actually ballet. It wasn't even tap dancing, ballet. So to practice something like prospecting, we might not even work on prospecting role plays. We might work on something just like eliciting questions from your prospect, how to get them to answer questions that you haven't even asked. And these are different tactics that you can work on in conversation that have nothing to do with the thing you're selling, but they're able to actually be applied and carried over into your sales conversations. So I know that was a really long way to answer your question, but basically the point I'm getting at is that you don't need to just do very focused role plays on prospecting. You can focus on other human, soft conversational skills that are going to translate to anything that you do so that when you're in those prospecting conversations, it doesn't sound like very robotic and checklisty. It sounds like, look, we're just having a discussion, but I'm getting everything that I need on the back end.
Dope, 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 dope. I love it. Steph Curry setting the standard. That's one of the words I've been using a lot in the past, over the past like couple of months. Is just when you really understand like standard, like this is a standard, like this is a minimal acceptable level. Like everything goes beyond above that. Like then you start to, it just helps a lot, especially with planning for 2024 for our organization and whatnot. But I really like this and the concept there of just isolating the I want to say those different skill sets beforehand, instead of just jumping on doing just random cold call. Jonathan and I, we talked a lot about that. That it's not just, sometimes people just do cold call role plays to do cold call role plays, but that's not necessarily really helping. Focus on where you need to be and what it is that we need to do at that particular time. So, love it. Listen, man, this was awesome. If there's one major tip you want folks to leave this episode with, what's that one major piece of advice?
Mm. The one major piece of advice, honestly, is it would be for first line managers. And it would be when you're giving your sellers feedback on what they're doing or how they're performing, make it actionable, make it specific, make it relate back to that standard of what good looks like. I hear so much feedback that's like, hey, that was good, but can we make it more collaborative? Or do a better job of asking, open-ended questions. Great. What does that look like? And what does good look like in this
Mm,
situation? So if I could give you one tip, I would just say focus on really actionable feedback. And in order to do that, you have to be able to have a standard of what good looks like so that I know the gap. Just like we saw the gap with where we were at Emory and where Davidson was. If I'm not aware of that
Davidson.
gap, I can't coach to it and I can't work towards that. So make them aware of what good looks like and then be very specific with your feedback.
Love it, man. If folks out there listening want to get connected to you or to the practice lab or to learn more about the program or just about the organization and overall, what's the best way for them to go about doing so?
Yeah, you can find us at thepracticelab.co. My email is just Lawrence at thepracticelab.co. We actually have a free training that you can go through to get an idea of kind of what it's like to work with us. So if you want to get your hands on that, just email us at hello at thepracticelab.co.
We'll put that in our show notes, man. Lawrence, thanks for taking the time to come on the show today. Thanks for bringing so many insights and good luck with everything that you're doing.
Donald, thanks so much, man. It was a lot of fun.
Man, that was some good stuff, man. I really love it. I love the idea of the standard. I've been talking a lot about that recently, so it was something that was near and dear to my heart. And especially, what does good look like? For many of us, we're doing things or running motions that are not necessarily the most beautiful place. Let's make sure we're doing the things that are right and we're doing it appropriately. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and connect with Lawrence. Check out the practice lab and the cool things they're doing. As always, we're bringing you things that can help you to increase your pipeline. We want you to have right deals, as well as you have the best method to go about closing those deals. As always, This podcast is designed specifically for sellers and sales leaders like you. If you know somebody else that can benefit from it, go ahead and tell them, as well as check out our sponsors because they're giving you some amazing deals, amazing offers that can help you to do exactly what this episode is all about. As always, I want you to raise your level of thinking. I want you to go out and do big things, but most importantly, go make that money. Thanks so much.